Welcome to Podcast Perspectives. This week on the show, we are going to be presenting a webinar that was recorded via Zoom on October 1st, 2025. This webinar was presented in partnership with the Podglomerate in New York Festival Radio Awards. It was moderated by Chris Boniello, Podglomerate VP of Production Services and also producer of this show, Podcast Perspectives. And it featured panelists Katie Simon, supervising senior editor at NPR, working on the show Embedded, Chris Oak, executive producer at CBC Podcasts, and Kristen Nelson, head of audio at the Boston Globe. This webinar is all about the secrets to production success from trophy-winning podcasts. In this webinar, we will uncover exclusive insights from today's leading podcasters on how they've produced hit shows and what they've learned along the way. You'll hear about advanced production and storytelling techniques used by industry-leading studios and creators, emerging trends in tech, including video, shaping show productions, cost-effective tools and workflows to streamline your production process, and best practices for pitching your story or series idea for collaboration. This is a rare opportunity to learn from some of the best in the audio world and transform your approach to audio creation. Let's get right to the webinar.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. To get us started, Rose Anderson is going to provide introductions.
Hi, I'm Rose Anderson, Executive Vice President, New York Festivals. It's terrific that so many of you are joining us today for this masterclass in storytelling presented by the Podglomerate. From script to success, production secrets from trophy-winning podcasts tells it all. I can't think of a better way to kick off our 2026 Radio Awards. We'll be accepting entries through January. Our website is radio.home.newyorkfestivals.com, and I hope you'll check it out. New technology and new platforms keep changing our industry. It seems like there's a new one every day. What hasn't changed, though, is the craft of storytelling itself and the people who make it happen. The best ones make it look so easy, and what they do inspires all of us. Every year, we work with our advisory board and industry leaders to make sure that our categories recognize the innovative audio content being made worldwide today and reflect our commitment to podcasting and the power of the individual voice. This year, we have 22 categories, especially for podcasts, including our newest, video podcasts. And podcasts are eligible in all other category groups. So from drama and investigative journalism to documentaries and breaking news, New York Festival's Radio Awards can be the destination for your submission long list. A grand jury made up of 100 trophy winners from 20 countries listen online and score entries in 2 rounds of judging to determine the results of the selection process. This is peer review on a global scale, and that 360-degree perspective is its strength. Radio is the original social media, and the theater of the mind is always open. Today's participants have earned the highest accolades from New York Festivals, multiple grand, gold, silver, and bronze trophies, the National Press Club Award, and Broadcaster of the Year honors. I'm sure that you are as eager as I am to hear the secret sauce behind their hit programs. So I'm going to pass the baton over to Chris Boniello, the Emmy Award and Webby Award-winning VP of Production Services at the Podglomerate. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Rose. Happy Wednesday to everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for attending. And as Rose just said, I'm Chris Boniello, the VP of Production Services at the Podglomerate. Podglomerate was just named Best Podcast Marketing and Production Agency by PR Daily. We're an award-winning services firm. We specialize in production, marketing, and monetization, and we have many clients including NPR, Netflix, PBS, the Boston Globe, Harvard, and beyond. And if you want to learn more, you can visit our website, thepodglomerate.com, and we're going to have more webinars like this in the future. And if you're looking for any resources on production, monetization, or marketing, you can visit our website. We have many blogs about those as well. And I'm really excited to moderate this conversation in collaboration with the New York Festival's Radio Awards. Our topic today is From Script to Success, Production Secrets from Trophy-Winning Podcasts. So we've got an awesome group here to go over on this webinar, how you take your initial story from the script phase into the production phase, into post-production, and then how you're getting it into those award submissions and then out into the world for everyone to listen to. And we've got really impactful people here as our guests. We have Katie Simon, the supervising senior editor at NPR. We have Chris Oak, the executive producer at CBC Podcast, and we have Kristen Nelson, the head of audio at the Boston Globe. So we're going to go through some tools, some workflows, some strategies. You've probably heard many of their shows. All combined, we have shows like Embedded, Throughline, The Outlaw Ocean, Uncover, and Snitch City. And so to jump this off, I'm going to throw a question over to Katie to start off. And a simple one, do you have any tips, tricks, or lessons from previous productions that you always make sure when a new production is starting, whether it is in a story phase, a scripting phase, or you have some raw audio that you bring along with you?
Tips or tricks? Well, I would say for us, so just to sort of put myself in some context here, I am sort of representing Embedded. So I am representing NPR's home for documentary journalism, long form storytelling. So I'm talking about things sort of specifically from that perspective as opposed to other types of podcasts. So tips or tricks? I mean, I think my this feels maybe perhaps mundane and a little obvious, but I have noticed that it's worthwhile, is to really take the time to organize everything first. We are, when we're working on series, we're dealing with sometimes thousands of hours worth of tape. And so we always take the time to do a really robust organization. We assign a producer to be the sort of shepherd for tape organization. We all agree to a method. We don't necessarily have one style or method that we always use, but we agree to it as a sort of smaller team who's working on a particular series or show. And we always do that part of it first. Rather than diving in, sometimes we're working on pilots too, but I would say even rather than sort of iterating around ideas, that's a step that is time consuming and cumbersome and not always the most fun or sexiest part of the job, of course, but that's something I would say that I would highly recommend. We have amazing senior producers on our team who really are just whip smart at doing that. But if that's not something you do, I would highly suggest building it into your structure.
Great. And I know within that structure, a lot of our guests here have already worked together on a few productions. So I was wondering, Chris, as you're coming into a production like this and you're building out that structure, when it's with a partnership with someone else, as you're starting this production, what sort of tricks are you bringing in right there to say, we've learned this in previous productions. We now have a partnership here. We've got a great story idea or maybe a great pitch from someone. How do we get it off the ground running here?
Yeah, I think sort of what Katie's saying, like making sure that you set the ground rules for how you're going to work. Like, CBC is a big organization. So like when we worked with NPR on Tested, for example, we needed to make sure that, everyone was on the same page, that like maybe our workflows were united and making sure we knew sort of who was in charge of what and how, notes would be done. To answer this question, but also jumping off on the previous question, I think having a robust outline and really focusing in on the story and the outline as early as possible, I find to be really helpful so that we, even before you go out gathering, even before you're really building the team, so that you know what your story is and you sort of have a bit of a roadmap. And obviously, once you start researching and reporting, things change. Hopefully you're surprised, and hopefully that's what makes a lot of the best podcasts the most compelling, that you're surprised as you go along. But like always, like working and revising that outline, as you go along, and definitely before you start scripting, make sure that everyone's on the same page and you don't end up with a script or even a mix that is a complete surprise to any member of your team.
Yeah, that's great. I know for us, we also like to try to sort out the goalposts with final deliverables as you're starting that process, especially in a partnership when you're working on a bigger show. All three of you come from much bigger media and legacy companies where there was broadcasting involved, much stricter standards than where we're at now with some of the apps where you can upload various things and you kind of have to be your own final QC and stopgap there to make sure things are at the proper levels. Is that something, Chris, that you guys are setting up on the front end as well? Those deliverables before you kind of dive in?
Yeah, like we'll have sort of contracts in place in terms of deliverables, and we go through a sort of robust production schedule, sort of similar to the outline. It's always subject to change. We don't always meet those deadlines, but again, it's all about communication and knowing, if you just have like we hope to be done by X date and just hope to hit that, then you're going to be in trouble. But like if you've got the small sort of deliverables along the way, like as many deadlines as possible, then you know when you're starting to get off, when you're falling behind, or if you're maybe ahead of time. Um, yeah, like having that in place is crucial.
Thanks. Yeah. And Kristen, I'm wondering at Boston Globe and your previous time at CBC too, but at Boston Globe, coming from traditional media, newspaper media, where the story is being developed and probably presented to you in one format, and then you're trying to build out from that into an audio story. What's the balance there as you're getting paper and script and story and seeing, oh, is this worth it to transition into an audio story, or is this something that's better going to live on the page and we have to figure out a new format for it to bring it into a podcast world?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. And I think one of the big things is trying to, you know, it's the gift and the challenge of where I'm at is there's so much great journalism happening all the time in this place. And so it's just figuring out how to capture it and making sure that people understand, because you don't actually want to be in a situation where you're just getting texts and then you can't just turn that into audio, and so it's making sure that there's an awareness up front of, okay, here's a story that does have audio potential. Let's talk about this. Let's think about what the workflow is going to be if this is one that's going to have good audio potential, because we can't just turn it into a great podcast after the fact like that. I mean, that could be a great narrated article or something, but it just won't be a great podcast.
Yeah. And then you can add on additional challenges on the back end. I know all of us are figuring out video as it's going. It feels like it was initially one sort of thing. It's evolved. It's changing. Sometimes it feels like we're remaking documentaries and reality TV, and other times we're shifting into new worlds. And I was interested in how Snitch City decided to move into the animated world on video. Was that something on the starting end as you were developing, or is that something that came further along in this process?
It really, I can't take credit for it. It was our great visuals team who, definitely we were all in conversation early on. And because it was such a challenging story in terms of how many people, obviously to protect the identity of confidential informants who, weren't going to have to be anonymous. And so early on, the visuals editor decided, and Ryan Huddle, who also leads on that for us, they decided, okay, there's not going to be a lot of photographs, so we're going to have to lean into animating this, and they hired a great person, an illustrator, to do that. And so then the idea was, well, let's experiment with this and take the audio and try to animate it. And that was a huge effort. And, so between the illustrations and some photos and documents and that sort of thing, that, they took the audio and turned it into something else beautiful. So it was an early on decision, for sure.
Yeah. And I think it's amazing. It's one I've used it as an example in productions. I think it's a fun way to figure out transforming what might not work quite as video into a new format, and then what you need to add, what is decorative versus non-decorative, what makes it exciting to watch there, I think is a lot of fun and an interesting challenge that we're all facing a little bit here. But I think animation is a great way to add something to it. Katie, I was wondering, at NPR, is that something that you're looking at in that early stages of figuring out your storytelling approach? Are you seeing more pitches with video elements added to it? Are you seeing larger stories in terms of the deliverables with those elements?
I'll answer that a few different ways. No, I don't think we're seeing pitches with video elements yet for embedded. That doesn't mean that NPR at large isn't seeing some sort of pitching, video podcast pitching that might be happening that I might not be aware of. But what I will say is that, well, something that's twofold. We are thinking about it. In terms of how can we sort of enter that space. Yes, I agree. I think Kristen, the Boston Globe, you guys did an amazing job. Animation has been something also that is very appealing, I think. Actually, back from my days at StoryCorps, when we did a lot of animating of stories, it can really help when something historic, when you haven't gotten out there with a videographer. To get it initially, right? You can recreate it in a way that's very, very powerful. But we are thinking about ways of including video and potentially short docs as a part of Embedded's work. It's something that we're working on for 2026 and 2027. But I haven't had people come to me yet with like actual video podcast pitches for documentaries.
Be interesting to see what they bring. I think we're shifting to a larger world of deliverables here, where a podcast is going to have a lot more elements than just the audio these days that we're used to. And then going back into kind of the storytelling elements, Chris, I had a question for you coming from the perspective up in Canada. How are you building at and looking at stories in these initial stages to say, we want to keep this a domestic audience, we want to grow international, we want to look at, for example, these awards like here in New York? What are you looking to plan ahead of time to say, this is going to work domestically, but we want to be able to send this internationally, or we want to keep it here?
Yeah. I mean, I think like podcasting itself is a pretty global medium. But yeah, so like Canadians are listening to podcasts from around the world, from the US, lots of NPR, The Daily, lots of BBC podcasts as well. So I think Canadians are sort of maybe more used to a slightly more global perspective. So I think like because of that, and because like we're all sort of competing in the same podcast charts and for time in people's ears, we just want to make sure that the stories stand up to that. So that can sometimes mean that they are really international globetrotting topic, like Tested, for example, again. But it can also mean something like really small, like we had a series called Come by Chance, which is about two men that were switched at birth in a very tiny town in Newfoundland. And, in that case, like the more specific you get, the more interesting and more universal it sort of becomes for listeners. So we don't really see it as an issue between sort of, domestic Canadian audiences and international. I think, as long as we're making a really great story for our Canadian audiences, I think Americans and Brits and Nigerians and everyone else will be interested as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And when you're structuring those teams, like for a smaller story, for example, are you looking to build out a single producer that's seeing that story all the way through? Are you building out multiple people for episode specific ideas, or people to go chase leads to go beyond things? Or are you trying to keep things contained within a small team?
Yeah, it's we have different production models, but often it's contained within a team. We like for our hosts to be actively involved in the production and reporting. I find like that the closer someone is to the story, the better the telling of it often. So there is that, and so if you can get somebody with some knowledge, some sort of experience with the story itself, then that's great. But then I find it also helps to have somebody with a bit more of an outsider perspective, and whether that outsider perspective is based in Toronto and you're telling a story in small town BC, or even like we've worked with folks in the US and the UK as well, and it's sometimes interesting to see the takes that they have on these stories that we maybe take for granted. So having a mixed team in that way, it's quite a privilege to have 2-3 people on a team, but it really does help.
Yeah. And on the team building aspect, Kristen, I was wondering, when you're working with journalists and hosts who might be separate from the researcher and storyteller on the newspaper side of things, are you looking to build out a host for their talents or also their possible expertise in that subject?
Well, we have a couple different things here. I mean, certainly we have a relationship podcast, and it's very much about the host, Meredith Goldstein, who, has an outsized, um, she has a following. She's a personality. She's someone you want to spend time with, and sort of, so that sort of helps shape that world. Um, and she's a big part of, it's narrative storytelling, but she's sort of by definition a part of all those narratives. On the investigative side, it's tricky. I have to say, like, it's really interesting working with print journalists or, traditionally print journalists. And there's a real ability to look. A lot of what I spend my time doing is doing audio skills transfer, and doing a lot of sessions and teaching people how to do the thing. And it is magical. I love audio, and what we do is hard, but also you can teach people how to do this, and there's a lot of people who maybe came up in print or digital, like text only, who are very keen and very trainable, and if they have an interest in audio, you can absolutely learn it. Like, I want to say that here, if anyone is sort of coming in and wondering if they can, it's hard, but it's doable. Like, I've seen these print people become, yes, as Murder in Boston, the podcast that we did, and Adrian Walker, he's telling the story that happened back in the 80s when he was a cub reporter, and you've got all these like grizzled people who, print reporters who came up in smoky newsrooms, and they're just like, oh my God, I can't believe you're a podcaster now, like, it's just, and he sounded fantastic. And that team really like learned how to do everything from soup to nuts. And so, yes, there was strong production help along the way and a lot of story editing, but it's doable. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
I think it does. Do you have any quick tips or tricks that you use when you're bringing in someone for those audio skills? I know I like to get a new host or someone who doesn't have too much practice work on listening to their own voice. And then one of my tricks is if they think they're going to say to put their tongue to the top of their mouth or the back of their teeth, hold it there for a second and try to not say the there. Do you have anything you're always bringing to the table?
I will say, we have a person we've brought to the table a lot. I think a good producer has a good ear and can help train the person. So as long as someone is willing to go through that learning curve, and not everyone is going to get there, I don't think, but if you bring in someone outside who, like, I've worked with actors who really help elevate in just a couple sessions with an actor, and actually with Chris and I, the podcast that we did together, we had a very like traditional news reporter who wasn't used to the tone that you needed for podcasting, and it just takes a couple sessions with the right person, and if they're open to it, that you can train them. And I don't know. I think the big one, if I had one tip, is I like to say, okay, just start with, I'm going to tell you a story, and look at me and tell me that story. And so I like to just get real intimate in that room with them.
I think that's great. Yeah. Breaking down those initial walls, getting comfortable with people, getting them a little bit off script, introducing themselves as if they were at a cocktail party or something a little more relaxed.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if we, just along those lines, if we're working with somebody who doesn't have a ton of experience writing for audio, writing for this type of audio, we will sometimes just go completely off script and just say no script for a while, and we're going to do sort of big brain dumps, and then we'll rewrite the script based on those brain dumps. Or sometimes we don't even need to, but we will go into sort of a slightly non-narrated style of collecting tape to create something pretty quickly if the person we're working with, is either a really traditional news reporter, even if that's news for audio, or just doesn't have any experience with it. And it's very effective in our experience.
Yeah.
And just to jump in, like one other thing that I've found to be interesting, like working with hardcore journalists, like it's sometimes the storytelling takes a little while to sort of figure out. I think that they're used to sort of stating what they know up top, the whole inverted pyramid, and then giving you evidence of it as it goes along. And you sort of have to encourage them to sort of flip that around, start with the question that drove them, that made them curious in the first place. And then as we go along, as we report it out, then you arrive at the conclusion that you arrived at. It's sort of it's a bit of a switch in the brain, I think, but once you get there, it can be really good.
Yeah, I don't think you have to be too worried about being locked in on the page when you have a script with a host who has a personality or something you're trying to achieve there. Can be nice to get them first to find their voice, and then you can rewrite in that voice. I know we try to not be overly locked in scripts on some of our narrative things if it's not working with the voice, if it's becoming too performative versus natural. I think that's something a lot of new hosts deal with, and people coming from other industries into this, because now you are partially an actor, partially a host, partially a narrator, and also a storyteller on this level that is not quite as comfortable as just reading something off a script there. Katie, I was wondering, in that world where NPR shows kind of have a voice and almost have a feel to them, do you ever feel like you're setting up the box to be inside of it, or do you guys like to try to break down some walls and move away from what people might call the NPR sound?
Yeah, very much the latter. I think we have enormous respect and admiration for the sound, right, that we helped to develop. But the thing that's really exciting about the way Embedded works now, Embedded, for those of you who don't know, was started by Kelly McEvers, longtime NPR reporter and host who did just amazing, outstanding work. It has transitioned into a new era where we are now working with a different host with every single series. So we are actually Kelly does sort of an intro and sort of shepherds people in to the story for all of our stories, but we are fundamentally working with a different host, a different maker, somebody with different aesthetics, with different style, with different experience, with different aspirations for every single series we do. And that's something we're really trying to lean into. One of our series might be very memoiristic, very personal, very sort of heartfelt, very off script. Another series of ours might be very, much more investigative, much more sort of traditionally reported. And so far, at least with our listeners, they're coming along for the ride. We're kind of promising them, hopefully, excellence and a really, really good story, something that they feel, feels relevant, feels sort of integral to their lives right now, but like take a chance and just like come on this ride with us. And so far it's working. And I would say some of our stuff has sort of an NPR sound, and then some of it really doesn't, but right up against each other, like within the same year.
Yeah, and when you're in that process of kind of re-envisioning sound like that, do you find that there's a lot of back and forth there, a lot of editing in the post-production to achieve that, or re-recording? And what's that workflow look like for you guys?
No, I mean, I think we like each series, the aesthetic for Embedded is that it's really on the ground reporting. So as long as we have that element to it, where we are really sound rich, scene based, everybody on here knows what I'm talking about, right? As long as we have that, we're not doing conversations, we're not doing sort of very historical things where we're certainly not recreating anything. As long as we have that, we're using that as the thread that sort of connects all of our series together. And then we're really letting our makers like have their, I want to use the word point of view. That feels like it's certainly sort of veering into opinion. I don't mean it that way, but sort of they're bringing their aesthetic to the table of how they want to sound and how they write. So it's actually really fun to work in these sort of different little bubbles along the way.
Yeah, I think creating that aesthetic of a new show, or bringing it back or refreshing it, is one of
Yeah.
most fun creative processes you can have. You can kind of break a bunch of things and decorate a few things and see what works or doesn't work. Kristen, is that a process you're going through at the Boston Globe, having a defined sound, but then bringing these aesthetics to a specific show and saying, we need to keep this feel across this whole season, but maybe on this episode we can break something or change something. Maybe we can do a new intro. Maybe we can shift the tone here, but still keep it whole across the series.
Well, certainly, I mean, I think we have a similar thing. The spotlight feed that we started for Snitch City is new, but it will be similar. The investigative podcast that the Globe has done before me and with me, it's similar to Katie's experience, where it's a different host each time, a different aesthetic, a different story. And so the thing that's going to keep them equal for us in that feed is the level of production, like the standard of journalism, absolutely. And, the spotlight and brand, the high level of investigative, holding people to account and taking you on, a great journey. So we're still figuring that out. But I think I look to embed it all the time about how to do that and uncover.
Kristen, we should talk more. We're very aligned. We're like trusting that the audience understands the sort of quality of journalism and the approach, I think, maybe to storytelling and journalism that we're taking. And then we're saying, like, please come, you might be interested in this topic, or you might not be, and you might be really interested in this other topic, and like it's a little bit of like pick and choose your own adventure, since we're a limited series within the same feed as opposed to just like a weekly episodic thing.
And that also allows each season to be the best sort of podcast series that it can be. And so like some stories, maybe aren't quite as serious, so you can afford to be a little bit more playful. Other ones where you would not want to do that. You want to be a little bit more journalistic and by the book. Yeah, we're all similar. We do the same thing in Uncover. And it really allows each individual series to have its own voice and to be told the best way possible.
And when you're doing that, Chris, I know we were talking earlier beforehand that you really like story producing and kind of story editing and massaging those moments. Is that something you're looking at on a whole for a series, or are you guys building episode and looking to maintain that consistency while editing and giving feedback within the team? Also being under the larger CBC umbrella to fit it within those shows too.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's sort of similar. Like we just want the storytelling quality to be as high as possible. And so we're often, as we're outlining, we're looking at the series as a whole and sort of making sure that there's a structure and a story arc to that. But then, it's not just one story that you're breaking into 6 pieces for a 6-episode series. Like we want each of those individual episodes to be compelling and to have a story arc of their own, to have a driving question, to feel satisfying at the end of it, so that you hypothetically could listen to just one episode and think that was really, really good. But then also it's so good that you want to continue on and listen to the next. So yeah, it's something that we're working on as we go along, and we, from the structure, the episode outline to paper edits, we're going through and making sure that that's all there. Then we'll listen to a mix and listen through and make sure that that's compelling. And then often, in best case scenarios, we once the sort of majority of the episodes are done, we'll go back and listen through sort of back to back to make sure that there's no sort of needless repetition, that there's no story strands that have been sort of left unresolved, that listening to it in a sort of binge form, which is the way a lot of listeners tend to consume things, that it still holds up and that it works that way too.
Yeah, I always find that as a team, it's really helpful to go back, listen to those mixes, and then notice the moments of saying, oh, I went to check my phone, or I went and looked at emails during here, and now I'm not paying attention, and that might be a spot to edit. Or if I put it on in the car, and now I've noticed that 20 minutes have gone by, and I didn't actually process anything, oh, maybe we should jump back in here, adjust this story. And then, if you're locked in, it also leads into the point of saying, like, actually, we've really nailed this. Now do we submit it to awards? Now do we go beyond this and start promoting it? And as you're getting to those stages, I know you guys have all kind of worked together a bit, but how are you looking at promoting and interacting between different companies. I could throw this to you, Kristen, first, as building that newer Spotlight team and promoting those stories now on the audio format, looking either for awards, promotions between teams, saying, we're really locked in on this story. We're really happy with it. We think it's amazing. Now we want to really put it out into the world and make sure it doesn't just end up in the sea of other shows.
Yeah, I mean, it's nerve-wracking launching a new podcast at this moment in time, but I think with the Globe we have a wonderful, really powerful digital audience and audience team, and so when you sort of like leverage all the different corners of the Globe and have a smart marketing plan, I think it's still doable. It's very hard, but I think one of the things that we have going for us too is this very, very powerful brand in Spotlight. And so I think that helped, I mean, absolutely having a very strong product, but also, it helped us get a little bit of attention that way, and just natural marketing as well. I mean, we had one billboard up in New Bedford, and like the audience there was incredible. Like, I still also believe in just like on the ground marketing and like handing out QR codes and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of levers to pull. You just need to be creative and, have a plan early.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Katie, I saw you nodding your head. Was there anything you wanted to add?
I mean, we, since NPR has an enormous broadcast reach, we have a regular plan with our colleagues on the broadcast side of things, where we do, segments in two ways, with our colleagues at Morning Edition and All Things Considered, which often brings to light like some really interesting reporting for their audiences, of course, and then, works back to the podcast. So we do rely heavily on that, sort of using the NPR and the NPR network to get out the word for us. But it is a tall mountain to climb. And I love the idea of a billboard in New Bedford, Kristen. That sounds wonderful and like really perfect for that series. So I'll have to think about that.
I think that's great. When you're on the other side of that mountain, what are you looking at for your success for a show? Whether it's just numbers, beyond numbers, what sort of engagement you're getting from the audience there?
I mean, for embedded, something that we've really been focusing on are consumption rates. There's a certain amount of self-selection, right, at a lot of different points, right? There's self-selection of, do I like long form audio at its most basic? And then there's a self-selection of like, is this topic interesting to me? Or, is this something I want to spend time with? Is this host somebody I want to spend time with? But what we've had a lot of luck with over the last 2.5 years is having just a really high consumption rate, where we're seeing like, once you sort of decided that this series is for you, we're getting over 90% of our listeners staying through and listening the whole way through. And so that, in terms of measuring the success, is a big measure for us. Different series are tapping into the zeitgeist in different ways. The news cycle, as we all know, is brimming with stories, right, that can be hard to compete with. But so once people are finding us and saying, yes, this is something, we're feeling that we're a big success when we have that over 90%.
Yeah, I would agree. When you're thinking about how long people are spending with you, because it can be really exciting just to get how, the level of engagement and the depth of engagement is still why, I really believe in the medium, and there's nothing like it. I mean, people stick with you, and that's incredible.
Chris, I saw you nodding your head. Anything to add there? Something you're finding from engagement with people, or consumption, or success within the team versus just download numbers?
Yeah, we're trying to move beyond download and sort of like look at like the number of individual followers, making sure, especially with a umbrella feed like Uncover, just making sure that every new series is growing the number of followers and listeners there, so that we have, I can't remember what the number is, but like 34 seasons in there now. So like if we do find someone new who enjoys what we're doing, they've got plenty of past seasons to explore as well. But I think, stepping back a little bit, like I think one of the things that we've done that I'm really proud of is we have a whole part of our team overseen by Tanya Springer, my colleague, who is sort of focused on audience and growth. And we try to bring them into the production process as early as possible. And so like even as we're still creating new episodes, writing and mixing, we are having those discussions about sort of like what's the quickest and easiest way to describe this show. What is, like we're looking at the title, we're looking at artwork, but I think the main thing is like we want to be able to describe it in a way that's simple and effective and really gripping, and then continue to do that in a way that any listener coming to that show will sort of get that. And if a friend of theirs asks for a podcast recommendation, they can sort of turn to that. It's a show about X, or whatever it is. And so I think having the audience sort of in mind at every stage really helps when you do get to that stage where you're trying to promote the show. And yeah, and I think like when we do see a success, like it's, for me, it's really nice to watch when an entire series has rolled out and you have that final episode go out, and then all of a sudden you see this big spike in whether it's listening hours or even downloads. For me, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but like for me it means like, oh, like we've done a really great job, this is a really great series that people have then gone out to tell their friends about, and they've decided to binge the entire thing or whatever it is. So sort of playing the long game and sort of looking at the long tail of some series as well. Like you'll see them stick around, whether it's in the charts or the amount of downloads for a long time. That's when I really feel like we've succeeded in telling a really successful story.
Amazing. And I'm just going to ask a short lightning round, quick question here. What do you find on these teams with limited budgets compared to other bigger media properties is one of the most cost-effective things you can do in terms of your team or your investment in production to make a high-quality show? Let's throw it to Katie first.
Work with talented people.
I'm gonna just keep copying all your answers.
I mean, sure, right. That sounds like a cop out, but work with talented people, and also like don't force something to work, I think, is another method towards efficiency and quality, right? Like all of this is hard work. I think we all know that. But we also know when something like is at its core going to work. And I feel like that's sort of the most efficient, right? Is not trying to like really grasp at something that's like a great idea, but doesn't have some of the core elements to the reporting like really in hand. So I mean, we're at our most successful when the reporter we're working with like actually has the access that they need to like really report the story. That sounds super basic, but it's not always the case. And it's things like that actually cause a lot of inefficiencies, and with inefficiencies, right, like a lot of money to be spent on trying to get to somebody or figuring out how to make up for, oh, we thought we were going to have that person, but we don't really. Like, how are we going to flesh out that part of the storytelling or the reporting? Like being sure that we have those elements when we're starting off the project, I think is the way we handle that.
Great. Chris, you got any secrets to...
Yeah, I think like if you're like an independent producer, like I think sort of Katie said, like work with great people. I think people is important there. Like even if you're one person and you're doing it all on your own, bring as many people in as you can. That doesn't mean like you're hiring a huge team, but like having people, just explaining the story to someone else can be super helpful and get you out of your own head and thinking about, how an audience might receive it. Playing mixes for people, which can sometimes be painful, but especially if you're in a room together and you're watching someone's face as you're listening, like you can go through it on your own 1,000 times, but like just once in a room with an actual other human being, instantly what's working and what's not. So yeah, I think there's that. And then I think also if an episode isn't working, like putting it off to the side, not hitting your head against the wall, but just like letting things sit for about a while and then come back to it. In that sense, you're almost playing the role of a new listener coming back to something and sort of re-engaging with it. Sometimes uh, issues that you might have with an episode or a series or whatever it is, if it feels like there's no solution, but like if you let it sit for a while, come back to it, those solutions can present themselves, or maybe you realize it wasn't a big issue to begin with.
Yeah, that's great. Going on to your mention of people, we can just throw it out if anyone wants to jump in, but how do you vet your talent or your people that you haven't worked with before as you're building these teams?
I can go first because we've spent a lot of time thinking about that over the past 18 months or so. We spend a lot of time with them. We rarely, frankly, just green light something that's coming from anybody. We only do 4 or 5 seasons a year. We're not a weekly show, right? So each one we're gonna sort of get involved with people for 9 months to a year, and so we need to make sure we all get along at a really basic level, that the reporting really stands up, that our NPR standards and practices and legal requirements and all of those will align with the way that the person who's pitching us wants to be able to tell their story. And so we do that really just by spending some time. We tend to we sort of formalize the way we do it a little bit. If of course, we pass on plenty of pitches that are amazing pitches that either just don't make sense for us in our show or are unaffordable or have been covered elsewhere recently. But if we decide we're really interested, we tend to spend 3 to 6 weeks doing something what we call our shepherding process, where somebody who's pitched to us will work with one of our producers. And there's no exact formula to it. Sometimes, because it depends on what the person is coming with in their pitch, right? But like, it might mean we ask that person to share a lot of their tape with us. We of course do this, in a way that like makes everybody comfortable. We're never taking your tape or anything like that. Um, and lets our producer listen and say, okay, this reporter is reporting in a way that's very familiar to us, that makes us feel very comfortable, that feels really robust, that feels like the way we would want to approach things. That's like such a great sign, right? That might be one thing we do. We also might take the deck or the outline or whatever the pitch was to begin with and work with that reporter on it to say like, well, here's how we think we would start to consider shaping this. What do you think? Are we okay? And what were you thinking you were going to do? Right. And so like, let's get a feel for each other's ideas about how to push this thing forward. Are we in alignment? Does this make sense? Does the person who's pitching us come to us with some outlandish idea that we just absolutely know would not pass muster at NPR, right? If so, like, we'll have a conversation about it. Was it an idea or is it something they're committed to? So it's a little bit like dating. We sort of date a little bit for a few weeks and make sure that we are, sort of simpatico with like how we would move forward to produce the story. And it's really important. It's obviously, I think it's obvious why it's important for us to do that. But frankly, I think it's just really, really important for the person pitching us. Like we want to be the right place for you to tell your story. There are other places for you to tell your story. We want to make sure it's really a series. So many people come to us with stories that are amazing stories that really should be told probably in a 15 to 20-minute piece. Maybe it's on This American Life, maybe it's elsewhere, right? But maybe don't actually fit into sort of our series structure. And so we want to make sure it's going to be a good relationship either way. So that's how we handle it.
Great. Let's jump in, kind of a shift from all of the larger talk we've had about everyone working at bigger organizations. What advice do you have for a small company that doesn't have the backup of a big organization?
I would say team up with other small companies. If you're putting out a series, doing like cross promo with other people doing similar series, things like that. Again, making sure that you're sort of making sure that other people are listening to your work as it's going out. Like find help where you can.
Yeah,
But yeah,
following up on that, what collaboration and cross-promotional opportunities should you look for as an indie podcaster? What's the best way to go about setting up that network? Do you guys have any tips on that?
Well, maybe in relation to both of those questions,
Yeah.
to take one step back is just like be really honest with yourself about what exact skills you're bringing to the table and which ones you're missing. And don't be shy about acknowledging the gaps and like find people who can fill those gaps. Whether that's marketing or cross promotion or engineering or fact checking or whatever it is, like just be super honest.
Great. Kristen, anything to add there? Or I saw you nodding your head along.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice, because just finding the holes, but I also think there's a lot that you can do. And I would think about also trying to just capture something and have a pilot, have something that is solid, like a trailer or whatever, and then going out to find the partner who's really going to help you find the biggest audience. But you have to have something to show for it. And the more you have to show, and like to Katie's point, like the more tape you have, the more of a sense that you can give like whoever you want to work with of what you're bringing to the table, the better those conversations will go.
Yeah, I agree. I think a trailer or a pilot or even 5 to 10 minutes of super, super polished stuff that has a tone, that has a setting that people can start imagining where it goes beyond that is such a great way to promote, to chat with people, say, we don't have full funding, we don't have this full story, but we've got 5 minutes of amazing audio.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see where this is headed from.
Yeah. Like we haven't said yes to anything that doesn't have tape.
Yep.
Whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. And going on that, Kristen, what are good strategies to convert a print piece into a podcast? So I think talking about this, building a trailer, start building some elements there. What elements do you think about before the print piece is reported?
Yeah, I mean, we've done this from different angles. Ideally, if we're talking about the kind of work that Katie and Chris do, and like talking about a serialized narrative story, then I'm not even thinking about it as converting a print story into, because by then it's probably too late, And so, but there have been great stories that are in print that we can do really well in a two-way after the fact if some tape was gathered. But really the biggest thing is thinking about it as audio first from the beginning, not thinking of it as a print story that you're going to convert, but thinking of how are we going to go about reporting this for both platforms. And you really need to be thinking about how you capture that reporting journey. And all like the big thing you need, maybe this goes without saying to this group, I'm not sure, but tape. You cannot have a good narrative podcast if you're not gathering tape. And so you're trying to record everything you can in your reporting journey, all the phone calls, all the Zoom calls, all the, and then, a lot of times with us, we don't know how big this story is going to get. It's like, ooh, this could go in a lot of different ways, and we're trying to capture it as it's unfolding. And that's often the best tape if you're capturing something as it's unfolding. But because you don't know where it's going, and before you can green light something or even yellow light it, you need to sort of have a sense of, okay, well, even what is the minimal version of this story? Okay, well, even if we only end up with the smallest version of this story, we're going to want tape on that, or as you're reporting this out, this is great, and this is going to be a big, big story, but we'll kick ourselves later if we weren't gathering audio from the get-go.
Yeah. And I think on that note, looking at the storytelling, look at the tape you have, how much do you leave to sound design to create impact and sensations for the listener, or do you simply prefer to leave it within the realm of the storytelling? What are you looking to either decorate or make more impactful with your sound design?
Me or anyone?
Anyone want to jump right in?
I mean, I'll say I think this is like very much a taste question. This is very controversial and it's hard, and it can get cheesy real quick, but it's also you're trying to create a setting and a scene, and there are tools to use to take the person into that, and so, but again, to Chris's point, like having those other ears, because sometimes you could think this is wonderful, and then you realize, oh gosh, that did veer into the cheesy, but also like some of the biggest podcasts, like, you know, that's a thing. You're taking them into a world.
Yeah. Well, I worry when people are sort of trying to use it as a crutch to try to make a moment more compelling than it really is. Like I think if you've got an emotional moment or a really compelling scene and you're using a little bit of sound design to bring that out and elevate it, then great. But if you're relying on sound design to make some boring tape sound exciting, then you might get into trouble.
Yeah, I would just really say less is more. I think from our perspective, I like the sound design to really be organic and come from the tape itself. I mean, we do scoring, we pace things out, right, so that they hit in the right way. We play with all of that certainly, but I would not be, I mean, you can be thinking about sound design, especially, as far as like your taste is concerned, what you like and what you don't like, but I would not be thinking about sound design as a tool early on. I don't think. I would really just be thinking about the reporting and the structure and like what characters are going to shift and change over your narrative. Sound design will not fix any of those holes.
Yeah, it's the icing.
Yeah.
That's great. All right, one last question. I guess all of you guys have a good amount of experience in this, but when you're developing your podcast around a true story, especially one with like local history, community, Chris, you were talking about this with building the smaller teams. How do you balance that need for your narrative drive and keeping it interesting and using those breadcrumbs to tell that story, but making sure you're honoring the real people in those events?
Yeah, and I think there's absolutely a way to do it, and maybe I'll just throw it to Chris, because I mean I feel like it's about, I mean, the great thing is you have people's voices, and that's what you're relying on, and you're trying to do justice to those voices, and you're letting it be in their words. And again, this is why I love the medium, is you're not selecting a quote here or there. You're really getting to know this person and this place in an intimate way. And I think that gets you a long way to answering that question.
Yeah. And I think like we all work for news organizations, and we have sort of standards and ethics and everything but like you have a responsibility to your subjects, but you also have a responsibility to your audience. And I think you just have to find the right balance for that, and make sure that that you're also doing justice for your audience as well, telling a story in a way that's true and also compelling. They're giving you a lot of their time, and so you want to be respectful of that.
Katie, last word to add in there on that, or?
No, I agree.
Totally agree.
I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I think I agree with what Chris said.
Amazing. I want to thank everyone for joining and listening. This was a really fun conversation. Thank you again to the New York Festival's Radio Awards team. Thank you to Rose Anderson for co-hosting this as well and doing such a wonderful introduction. Thank you to everyone on the panel, Chris, Kristen, and Katie. Tons of insights, tons of behind the scenes here. I think it's wonderful to keep story at the front of all of this, and how important it is to keep listeners engaged, keep things exciting while we're seeing a shift across the industry from audio stories to video to new deliverables to new ideas. So thank you for sharing all of your insights and thoughts and everything you've learned over the years here. And anyone in the audience, if you want to follow Podglomerate, you can find more about our resources for production, marketing, and monetization on our website, podglomerate.com. Keep chasing all those stories, keep making things fun, keep them exciting, listening to your mixes as many times as possible to find out where you're bored and make things really, tight and fun, and work with great composers, great people, great sound designers, great marketing teams. There's tons of people out there, and right now it's been a weird time for the industry, but there's tons and tons of talent out there and people who are really excited to work on fun, creative stuff. And all of the shows here featured are amazing, amazing productions. So I want to make sure we keep that in mind. Don't be so upset that people are bouncing around trying to find new ideas. Keep playing in these sandboxes and making amazing stuff. So thank you, everyone, and I'll throw it back to Rose.
This has been such a wonderful opportunity for New York Festival's Radio Awards to be part of this wonderful master class, because radio is the universal language, and it lets us communicate with others in the most profound way. So thanks to everyone, and keep listening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you again to Chris Boniello, Katie Simon, Chris Oak, and Kristen Nelson. You can find all of their work at their respective websites or on LinkedIn. And I encourage you all to listen to all of their podcasts because they're excellent. Podcast Perspectives is a production of the Podglomerate. If you're looking for help producing, marketing, or monetizing your podcast, you can find us at podglomerate.com, shoot us an email at listen@thepodglomerate.com, or follow us on all socials at Podglomerate Pods. This episode was produced by myself, Jeff Umbro, Chris Boniello, and Jose Roman. Thank you to our marketing team, Joni Deutsch, Madison Richards, Morgan Swift, Aaron Weiss, and a special thank you to Dan Christo.